And I'm very pleased that St. Ebbe's want to invite and have me interview all sorts of members of the congregation who span such a different, just a whole spectrum of different disciplines. We had a professor of mathematics last night, but this morning we're thinking about art and beauty and creativity. So I'd love you to invite to the stage two members of St. Ebbe's, and that's Hannah Watson and James Nairne. Great to be with you. Great to have you here. And you're sharing one mic? That's good. Okay. Very good. So Hannah, talk to us a little bit about your relationship with the arts. What's your sort of chosen way of expressing yourself artistically?
Well, it's quite nice that we sort of are the opposite sides of the spectrum in that I'm not musical at all. I love music, but I've always loved drawing and kind of I was always that kid that would be very happy sort of grabbing some pencils and sketching away. And then, more recently I'm a freelance illustrator, so sell kind of illustration commissions. I'm teaching myself to paint in oil, and that's more what I brought today. And then my main job is actually working for a charity. So there we go.
Fantastic. And James Nairne?
I wanted to be an artist since I was about 5, so a long time. And I went on to do a degree in it, and then ended up being an art teacher for 35 years, and I finished that last summer. And so I've had a bit more time for my art since then.
Fantastic. So a practitioner and a teacher about art. Okay. So that will lead me. Let's stay with you for a second, and we'll ask you both this question. What even is art? What's the point of it? I did slightly warn him, but it was only about 90 seconds ago.
I suppose I can talk about, for me, making art is an outlet of what I see in the world and what's important. I think you were saying that earlier. So I use remembered moments and places, and sometimes it's an idea that comes to me, and I put that into, or make that into an image, and that communicates, perhaps to myself, and I don't know why I want to do it. I just want to do it.
Well, you got from the laugh, didn't you? You got from the laugh that this is an impossible question, didn't you? Right? What even is this thing that we find ourselves
I think I
not
was saying
able not to
saying
do?
To you earlier, it's a very human thing. I think you on a practical level, you're mixing kind of physical things, but you're also thinking with your brain, and you're using your emotions, and that kind of wholeness I love, and I lose myself when I'm making it.
Interesting. You lose yourself, and does that mean you become less yourself when you do it?
Well, you probably become more yourself. And
right.
Often when I'm self-conscious about things, I don't do it as well.
Yeah.
Which is strange.
Well, you get that in music as well. You can imagine the violin player kind of losing herself in the piece, but never more truly herself than when she loses herself in the piece. And that's kind of an experience personally that you
definitely.
Have, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So Hannah, let me ask you that impossible question as well.
I'm glad you went first, James. I think touching on what we said, for me it's also about trying to communicate, and whether you're trying to communicate with words, with music, with kind of something visual. I think for me it's about seeing a moment in the world around you that you find really beautiful or really meaningful, and then trying to say to someone else, I would love you to feel what I felt in that moment.
Yes.
And for me, I guess the way I've chosen to try and do that is by trying to draw or paint it.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the work I brought was around family, and I think that's something that I found really meaningful, because we've got a toddler, had a baby last December, and I've had a lot of those moments of being like, wow, this is really beautiful and precious to me, and I want to find a way to somehow remember that and communicate that to other people, because they might have an experience similar to what I'm having, and I want to sort of awaken that experience in them.
Amazing. Should we see some examples? A lot of James's stuff is there, and a lot of Hannah's stuff is there. That's one of James's, and where's Hannah's? There we go. So yes, recently had a child. Maybe talk us through the one on the right-hand side of the screen, father and son.
Yeah, I think for me that was just a lovely moment where I was sitting there in real life watching my husband read a book to our son, And again, it was just such a sweet moment, and I just thought I really want to remember this, and I really want to be able to look back and maybe for other people to have either had that experience being that child or be that parent or that caregiver to a small child. And I think for me as a Christian, it brought another level to the fact that the Bible says we can call God Father, and God really talks about himself very often as a parent or a caregiver. And sort of seeing a scene like that added a level to how precious that was to me, that God wants us to understand him in a kind of relationship like that, where we are much loved children, kind of helpless and hopeless, and are not really contributing that much always to the relationship, but nevertheless God is always relating to us in that way of a parent who really loves their child.
I love that. And was that a photograph to begin with that you then did a...
Yeah, that's right. It was just like my iPhone that I kind of like whipped out and snapped in the moment, and then I thought, I want this to be more beautiful than just what my phone could capture.
That's interesting. So what is the added value? That sounds so economic, but what is the what gets added for you? And because you could have just put your snap up there, you could have just put your iPhone snap up there, and it would still be a lovely scene. But there's something that's added in you taking the time to make this beautiful piece of art, and there's something about us looking not at a snap on an iPhone, but looking at a beautiful painting. What's the added thing?
I guess maybe anyone could have taken that photo if they happened to be sitting there, but only I could do not a perfect picture, but a picture that comes from me, and in that way I'm sort of part of the scene.
And I think as we know it, as viewers, we know that it's been painted by the mother.
Yes.
And it's small, it's kind of tender in the way it's painted, and the mark making, and the colour scheme. The fact that it hasn't got a square frame, I think that gives it a kind of fuzziness or tenderness again. So I think those are the way it's made expresses some of the subject matter. And
Yes.
I can see this is the art teacher
The
coming
art teacher,
to
right there.
bring
Yeah.
his expertise. That's so kind, thank you.
Talking about beautiful moments, there's sometimes when you were talking about people today in Oxford will be outside sketching.
Yeah.
And I've sat down and you sketch something and you think, this isn't beautiful in some ways. I've got to bring it together and make it into a composition. And I think that's that aspiration of trying to make something more of what is there. We want to reflect what's there because there is a great beauty in the world, but also it's not perfect. And I think in my art I feel this constraint, this between trying to create something that shows the more, that pulls things together, that has a harmony, that combines colours, that sing, and yet, the real world isn't like that. So and whether your art should reflect both the real world or the world we want it to be is an interesting tension.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in your art as well, because yours is more abstract than this still. And so I'll ask you in a second what abstract art sort of adds to that picture. But Hannah, we've got that picture on the left. Photograph, the three hands. What are we looking at?
Again, this was like a crazy idea I had where it's actually a scan bed. So we have a scanner at home, and it's just our three hands layered onto the scanner, and me like pressing so hard on my son's hand because he was constantly trying to like, take it out and move it. But again, I think it's a lovely image to me because in this image, I was trying to communicate the idea of how amazing a hand is, and the Bible tells us that we're made in the image of God, and just the complexity of a hand, a small, chubby little hand that can grip so hard. And I love the fact that the Bible talks in that way about humans, that we're made in God's image, that we're knit together in our mother's wombs, that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And I think for me in particular, in my family, my uncle was born with this, he was born healthy, but then suffered an illness that caused a severe learning disability. And I think to then be told in the Bible that every human has innate worth, no matter what their physical abilities might be or their contribution to society. And I think that was all going through my mind when I grabbed a scanner and forced our hands into it and came out with that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Love it. James, let's have a look at, you've got lots of works here. This one's called Homeward Bound, is it?
It is called Homeward Bound, and I made it thinking about the journey I do from Oxford to my home in South Oxfordshire. So it's a car journey, and there's sort of a pink kind of figure things in there, as well as this kind of landscape and the idea of moving, but it's also meant to express feelings about coming home, and which you could think of as, if you want to put a religious slant on it, coming home to heaven, that sort of idea of being secure and a place where you're known and you can be yourself. So it's meant to be it's kind of an aspirational thing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It comes across.
so why, there's a lot of charcoal there, but also the sort of the green hills beyond. Is that
So
kind of contrast?
that's near where I live in the Chiltern, just on the edge of the Chilterns. You've got this escarpment, the Chiltern. Kind of you see it on the M40 as you go towards London, and that range of hills. So that is there, and then this kind of grey, kind of road-like, and then kind of things moving. But not all of it's explained. Some of it's kind of people can read. Yeah, it's a vibe. It's musical, isn't it? Music doesn't have a representation. So
fascinating.
partly the
Now, coming home was a kind of image that was helpful to you in coming to faith, wasn't it? So you sort of you had a sort of a faith home to begin with.
So I had a Christian home, sort of went to church, came to this university, and my kind of calling myself a Christian, but my life was focused on other things. I was definitely into fun and friends and parties, all sorts of stuff that was not, and I ended up very. Sorry, I ended up very kind of the first year very unhappy. I was in debt. I'd had a kind of failed relationship. My work was going really badly because I wasn't, and that was the thing. That's been a constant in my life, making art, and that was going really badly. And people have been, I've been to events like this, and people saying, "Come on, you've got to commit." And in a moment of despair, I gave in and said, "Yeah, Lord, I'm going to follow you." And that story of the prodigal son, one of the things that were holding me back was I felt I might have my art taken away. I might be asked to go and be a missionary, and I had to give that up. But then the prodigal son, the father gives the best cloak to his son. He wants the best for me.
Right.
So that was, I had to trust that.
Right. Yes. Because the story of the prodigal son, we'll think about it in a minute, but. Yes, this son takes his father's inheritance, runs off with it, squanders it in the far country and wild living, and ends up in a pigsty. But the homecoming is this beautiful scene of being robed by the father. And that actually he might have thought that true life was found in the far country, but actually coming home made him more truly himself, I guess. It's that kind of lost and found sort of story. Hannah, how did faith happen for you?
So I am lucky in the sense of I always had access to understanding what the Christian faith was because my parents are Christians. They're actually in the creche looking after my son at the moment. And so I was in church pretty much every Sunday, and I think that contributed a lot to me always feeling that God was there and that he must exist. But my main worry was whether the Bible was truly his word and whether what it said about life in the past when it was written and what it says about life now is true. And I studied English at uni, and we were doing a lot of, how do you interpret meaning and how do you trust meaning can be communicated by an author? And so all of that was really live for me. And then I think there are a few times when that question kind of comes more sharply to the fore. And one really significant time for me was losing two university friends in a very sudden, very unexpected way. And I think in those moments, I sort of saw two options. One was that there wasn't a God, and therefore what had happened was very tragic, but was sort of no more than, a mistake in a meaningless universe, and that we would have to bring any meaning to it that we could. Or the other option was that God was true, he was there, and that the Bible should therefore reflect my experience of what I was feeling, what people who were much closer to these friends were going through. And when I looked at the Bible, I could see that it not only kind of matched what was happening, but it gave more beauty, more meaning, and more worth to what had happened, and that it also accurately reflected back to me life as I was experiencing it.
Right. In both dimensions. So your Christian faith both helped you to take more seriously the pain, the grief, the loss, because this truly should not be. Mm-hmm. But if we say that it should not be, then I guess there's a way that things should be. So it both helped you to engage with the grief, but it also helped you to hope for better and hope for the meaning and purpose through it all.
I think that's exactly it. I think it really validated everyone's feeling that this shouldn't have happened, that this was an awful thing to have happened. But it also gave me a framework to understand that the Bible hadn't lied or misrepresented what had happened, that God gives us a framework for understanding grief and also beauty and joy and suffering, and that the Bible talks about humanity, eternity being placed in every human's heart, and therefore if we had the sense that life had been cut short, that there was the hope of eternity, and that because these people were Christians, that actually the hope of heaven was there for them and there for us. So yeah, it was doing two things at once, which was really beautiful.
Amazing. Final question to you both. How does your Christian faith help you as an artist?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think, interestingly, the times when I put art ahead of my faith, so it's really easy to think this. I want to do well. It's the most important thing, and actually, that's often when it doesn't go so well. Weirdly, what's the question again?
How does your faith help your art, or help you as an artist?
I think it helps you in your life, and therefore it helps put it in the right place.
Right. Yes. Perspective is everything in art and also in life.
It would be too easy. But it stops it being so important. It's not the most important thing.
Interesting. And with that pressure off,
maybe you can make better work.
Yeah. I always find it interesting that so my son is obsessed with Minecraft. It's always interesting to me, you can play Minecraft in two different modes. You can play it in survival mode, in which zombies are out to get you. But if you don't want the zombies to be out to get you, do you know what they call it? You just play in creative mode. And it's quite interesting that, once the survival mode is kind of dealt with, you're sort of more free to be in creative mode and that sort of thing. Yeah, interesting. Hannah, how does Christian faith help you as an artist?
I think it probably just gives you permission to be creative, because we have a God who's creative and making meaning all the time. And therefore, if we're trying to make meaning out of things, whether it's writing a song or a poem or a book or painting a picture, we're reflecting that element of God. And so, I think it's really validating. And then it helps when it's not going very well, or the picture didn't turn out the way you wanted, I guess, to still feel like, hey, I'm being creative. I'm doing something that's valuable.
Yeah, love it. Hannah Watson, James Nairne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I think that's so true, what Hannah says about being a creative person in a created world with a creator kind of makes sense of things. J.R.R. Tolkien obviously created the whole world of, not Narnia, what am I talking about? Created the whole world of Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth, to the point of actually creating languages. He was an expert in Anglo-Norse and Celtic, and out of those kinds of languages, he kind of made Elfish, right? And he was world building and made a whole bunch of made-up stories that have resonated with the human heart almost more than any other stories ever have. Absolute bestseller in the 20th century. And until J.K. Rowling came along, it was both Lewis and Tolkien who were the absolute bestsellers of the 20th century, making up their worlds of Middle-earth and Narnia. And you might think, okay, making up a world would make it resonate less with the human heart. You would think that maybe the bestsellers should just be history books, where we figure out what actually happened, or science textbooks that tell us about how the experiments ran. But actually the things that have been most human and most humanly relevant and most resonant with the human heart have been made-up stories. What's that all about? And J.R.R. Tolkien said, well, that's because we are sub-creators. Okay? Human beings are sub-creators. There's the great creator God, and of course Tolkien was a great Christian, as was Lewis. But he would say, there is God who originally made a world, but then made humanity in his own image in order to do godlike things. To be in God's image is to be godlike. And what is God like? He's a creator. And so what are we in touch with when we create stuff? We're in touch with our true existence as humans, but we're also in touch with something about God's nature as well. He is a creator, we are sub-creators. And that's why if you do go around Oxford today, you might see people on Christchurch Meadow, or you might see people in front of the Radcliffe camera, and there they are doing their little sketches, and they're spending hours looking up at that, but then mainly looking down at their piece of paper. And you're like, well, why don't you just look at the original? What are you even doing? You know what they're doing. They're being sub-creators, aren't they? And I love what James was saying, that there's something kind of imperfect about out there that you're trying to remedy, but then there's something imperfect here as well. But there's a human element in all our fallibility, in all our finitude. There's this human desire to recreate what has been created, to be a sub-creator like this. And there's this desire to represent the world. And I, as a human, I want to represent the world back to you. You know, Hannah had taken a snap, and she could have just shown us the photograph of her husband and her son. But instead, she represents that to us. She represents that to us. What is art? It's representation, representation, okay? And it could be more abstract or not, right? But there is this human element of taking what is in the world and representing it out to us. And we can lose ourselves in it and find ourselves in it. That's very interesting, don't you find? And I think that there is a frame that we can look at this through that will really help us understand that. And that frame is given to us in the scriptures. You've got some John's Gospels in front of you. Why don't you pick one up? I just want to draw attention to one verse in John's Gospel that I think helps frame why we love art, what art is, as representation. John's Gospel, this is one of the 66 books of the Bible. It's the fourth Gospel of Jesus, these biographies of Jesus. I guess the Bible is the world's all-time bestseller. And John's Gospel is the most read, most translated part of the Bible. So you're now, and this chapter, in fact, is the most studied and the most proclaimed part of John's Gospel. So you're probably looking at the most famous sentences in all of human civilization. Whether you think this is God's word or not yet, you're probably looking at some of the most important words that humans have ever studied. That's quite fun, isn't it? Verse 14. It's about 3/4 of the way down that first page. Little number 14 means it's verse 14 of chapter 1. And it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." This is who Jesus is. First of all, he's called the Word. What does that mean? Well, actually, up in verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word." He is the eternal Son of God, who before the world began was loved by his Father in the joy of the Spirit. Okay, that's who Christ is. Older than the universe. Through him all things were created. That's what the next few verses say in John chapter 1. So here is the Son of the Father filled with the Spirit, the creator of the world, who, in our verse, became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father full of grace and truth. So much we can take from this. For a start, it turns out that we have come from beauty. We have come from somebody who is beauty. We have seen his glory, the bright, shining magnificence of Christ. And apparently that's older than the universe. Beauty is not simply something that humans, when they are developed enough, are able to ascribe to a neutral creation. It's not like creation is just a whole bunch of rocks and matter in motion. And then at some stage in human history, humans start to develop an idea about beauty, right? I find that quite a barren vision for art, beauty, aesthetics. As though the world is largely just this big factory space, and we pull levers and cogs whir, and right, and then at some stage in the cosmological clock, humans come along, and we do some finger painting on the wall, and we decide that that's going to be beautiful. And maybe we only engage in beauty because it confers an evolutionary advantage on us, right? And then you do art because it helps you get a girlfriend, right? Seems to me a very barren vision for where art comes from. According to the Bible, beauty comes first. There is one who is beautiful, whose glory, when you see it, calls forth wonder. Have you ever noticed that about wonder? You can't push wonder out of yourself. You can't push enjoyment out of yourself. You can't make yourself love art, right? You'll go around here. Now we can point out things that you hadn't seen about these pieces of art, and then you go, now I see it. And then you might find yourself loving the art more than you had done. But you can't stand in front of something that you don't like and make yourself like it. Have you had that experience? You walk through an art gallery, and I, as a total novice, I don't know how fast I'm meant to go through the art gallery. And if I'm honest, I'm standing in front of this piece of art, not because I'm enjoying it, because I think I'd be a Philistine if I actually moved on too quickly. But you can have an expert in that piece of art saying, but you know what the artist is doing. She's trying to do this and that, and from that perspective. And they're like, now I see it. And then I can start to like it. But again, it's not me forcing appreciation out of me. I can't push wonder out of myself. Wonder is pulled out of me by something that is beautiful, that is wonderful, right? It's very much like faith. You can't push faith out of yourself. I can't tell you, believe in Jesus. Do it. Are you doing it now? Well, if you're doing it, crank it up to 11. Come on. Increase the faith. You can't. John's gospel has been given to us to present the glory of Jesus. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father full of grace and truth. And to see him, who Christians believe is the original beauty, beauty with a capital B, to see him, it calls forth wonder. It calls forth praise. It calls forth faith. It's pulled out of us so that faith is a bit like iron filings that get attracted to the electromagnet. And Christians believe Jesus is the electromagnet, right? He is the glorious one, the beautiful one, who to see is to love and to trust. So here's an amazing vision. Here is Christ, who is the Word of God. That means he's the expression of God. He's the representation of God, the representation of God. He is art. He is the representation of God in the world. And you say, well, I don't know about God. And actually, John's gospel agrees. No, nobody knows about God. No one's ever seen God. That's what verse 18 says of this chapter. No one's ever seen God. But Jesus is the one and only Son, and he represents God to us. He represents God to us. He is art who calls forth our wonder, our appreciation, our love, our faith. And we, made by this God, have been put into this world to enjoy the beauty of God, but also to enjoy the beauty of the world. And because we have been so dignified by God, we get to do a little bit of what God does. We get to represent the world in a human frame. Jesus is the representation of God in a human frame. And now, as humans, we get to represent truth and beauty, goodness and love in a human frame and get it out there. And that's why people are doing charcoal sketches on Christchurch Meadow right now. It's so incredibly human, and it's in touch with something so transcendent. We find ourselves by losing ourselves in this process of art, of trying to capture something of beauty and representing it out there into the world. I think that's a much richer vision for what art is than trying to get a girlfriend, right? Than imposing a culturally conditioned idea of beauty onto a world that's not actually beautiful. Away with such a notion. No. In scriptural frame, I think we can see why we do art. I think we can not explain it away. It's still mysterious. We still don't know what's happening to us as we do the sketch or as we look at the sketch. It's still incredibly mysterious, but I think it makes sense in this biblical frame. But notice the second thing I just want to draw your attention to in this verse. Here is Christ, who is the Word, the representation of God. He gives us a foundation for art. He's also called the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The one and only Son. Did you resonate with Hannah's painting? The Father and Son, right? Did you resonate with that idea of home from James? Coming home. What does that mean for you? Well, the Bible has good news for us all. Home is that family relationship. Home is a father-son relationship in the joy of the Spirit. And the home that you're homesick for is that original beauty, that original love. Jesus told a great story about it. It's called the prodigal son. It was very important in James's coming to faith. Do you know the story? Let's think about it through famous works of art. Let's think about Luke chapter 15 is where the story is found. And here's Bartolome Esteban Murillo in 1660. And he's painting the early part of the story. The early part of the story is the prodigal son. On the right of the picture, he goes to his father and he demands his inheritance while his father is still alive and kicking. And if you think that's rude in the 21st century, that is unconscionable in the first century. He basically goes to his dad and he says, "Dad, you know all that money that's coming to me when you die? You seem to be taking your time. I quite like that money now. Can I have your things, please? I want your stuff, I don't want you." Do you hear how rude that is? You know, sometimes we think of the prodigal son and we think of a bit of a rough diamond, right? This is atrocious. This is appalling behavior. He goes to his dad and he wishes him dead. And he wishes the fruits of his father's death so that he can enrich himself and get away from his dad, right? It's wickedness. it's also very relatable. This is the human condition. You know, we say to God, I love your things. I'm not that bothered with you. Thank you for a beautiful world. Thank you for beautiful art. Thank you for all the gifts that you give me. But I'd rather enjoy them without you. So let me take your things and get as far from you as I possibly can. In the name of freedom. In the name of independence. And then on the next slide, we see this prodigal leaving home. And he has one kind of robe there, doesn't he? It's kind of the robe that you steal from your father's house in order to gain independence. And then on the next slide, there he is in the far country. There's Rembrandt's version of it. And if you know anything about Rembrandt, who is the prodigal son there? Rembrandt himself, right? With his wife, okay? This is early Rembrandt, 1635. And he's living it up in the far country, okay? And it's so interesting that Rembrandt sees himself in this story. I think we're meant to see ourselves in this story. Certainly when I came away to university, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get as far away from any kind of childhood faith as I possibly could. To have fun without God, right? And the money is there for a little bit, isn't it? But eventually the money runs out on the next slide. And he goes to hire himself out to a pig farmer, which is not a great job for a good Jewish boy. Things have gotten very low, and he longs to feed himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything, and there he is in the pigsty. But then he thinks to himself, home is where I belong. That's why James is painting homecoming, homeward bound. So resonant, isn't it? Home is where you're safe. Home is where you're provided for. Home is where you can be yourself. Isn't it interesting that this prodigal son, he went for freedom and he ended up lost? If you do a Google image search on freedom, you'll find all sorts of images of, it's usually one person by themselves on top of a mountain at sunset. And they're sort of, they're independent and there's no one around. Our modern Western conceptions of freedom are indistinguishable from being lost, actually. It's like in Freshers Week. Sometimes I come speak on university campuses, and when I came to Oxford University to study, my mother, as we unpacked the very last box, and she was about to drive home and leave me to the far country, she had a tear running down her cheek, and she just said to me, Glenn, just fly, Glenn, just fly. And me, because sarcasm is my love language, I said, but only because you're the wind beneath my wings, mother. And it was very rude of me, and I regret saying that at the time. But there is that sense that you're free, aren't you? You're free. But in Freshers Week, you've never met such lost people in all your life, have you? Geographically they're lost. They don't know where the library is. They don't know where the lecture theaters are. After 3 years, they might not be much the wiser, but they're lost geographically. But they're sort of lost spiritually and emotionally. They want to find themselves. That's the motto, isn't it? I need to find myself. But if you're lost, do you need to find yourself? Have you ever found a lost person? Was that much help to you? If you're lost, you don't need to find yourself because you're lost, and finding a lost person is not much help. If you're lost, you need to find home, don't you? And the whole story of the Bible is that this one and only Son, beloved of the Father, has come into this world to find you and to bring you home. And so that's where the story goes on the next slide. Oh, in fact, yeah. That's interesting. That is right in the grip of the American Depression, in the Dust Bowl. And Thomas Hart Benton is imagining that the prodigal son comes home too late, and the farm has been sold, and blight has ruined all the crops, and there's only poverty. That's a really interesting representation of the story, isn't it? Don't leave it too long. Don't leave it too long before you come home. And then on the next slide, here's the famous Rembrandt. The son comes home to the father. There's an elder brother off to one side, off on the right. He's not actually that happy. You can read Luke 15 and find out all about the older son's story, okay? The Bible doesn't want us to be older sons who are just slaving away. It doesn't want that. It does want this lost son who is then found in the embrace of his father, and he's given the best robe. He had lost the robe that he had stolen from the family home, and then he's given the father's robe as a gift. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? And I imagine on the next day after they kill the fattened calf and they celebrate, I imagine he then wanted to work in the father's household. And I imagine he was then a better son than the older brother had ever been. I imagine he found himself more free in the arms of his father than he had ever been in the far country. Certainly more fulfilled than he had ever been in that pigsty. He came home robed by the father, still stinking of pig, but that's where he found himself, and that's really the Christian position. Christians call ourselves children of God, not slaves of God, children of God, right? That in the Son, by the Spirit, we are restored back to that true home. And then we're free. We don't have to do life in survival mode anymore. We've got it all. We have beauty himself. And at times we can play. We can play in creative mode. And we can start representing these beautiful truths back out into the world. It's a great vision for art. It's an even better vision for life, don't you think? Where are you going to find yourself? Some of you might try to find yourself in your art, and that's that. But as James said, that could almost become too important. The pressure to do well might end up crushing you. What about if you could be freed by Jesus, so that your identity and your worth, your freedom, your joy comes from him, and now you can be in creative mode, right? Wouldn't that be good? I don't know where you're trying to find freedom and joy, fulfillment. What is the far country for you? You won't find anything like the arms wide open of Jesus. You really won't. And he is calling you home. If you want to look into these things more, I'd highly recommend just keeping on reading in John's Gospel. You've broken the spine now, it's yours. Take it home, keep on reading, and see this arms-wide offer of Jesus to bring you home. We've also got a course called 321. That's the yellow leaflet that's on your tables. Over 4 Thursday evenings, you can see life again through the lens of Jesus. That should appeal to every artist in the room. You see life again according to Jesus. And there's some beautiful animations that can immerse you in the story again so that you see the glory of Jesus and faith might end up getting pulled out of you. 4 Thursday nights. Do sign up so we know how many knives and forks to set out. I've also got a little book all about stories. You know the difference between a comedy and a tragedy? Well, this book will tell you how Jesus actually gives us a comedy in the midst of our human tragedies. You can have a read of that. And there are many more events to happen this weekend. Tonight we're having some jazz music. I'm speaking again. And then tomorrow there's church at 10, at 4:30, and 6 o'clock. We would love to see you then. But I'm going to hand back to Nancy Page. Thanks, Nancy.